break in the press, or a rumour will emerge on the internet or via word of mouth that astonishes, astounds, but ultimately draws skepticism. Whilst the world is a mysterious place and science is not able to explain everything, sometimes things just seem too far from the realms of reality for the average person to comprehend or accept. Sometimes these stories of the fantastic might seem hokey or on the fringe for most. But if they have been observed by others, especially many credible witnesses, maybe there is some truth in the story, and maybe our perception of normality is just that, our perception, and not actually close to that which dwells in the recesses of reality. What we're going to discuss tonight falls specifically into this category. But before you make up your mind on this one, I urge you to listen to all the facts, contemplate them rationally, and maybe even conduct some further research, because this one is really out there and might take a little extra to digest. These are the extraordinary events at the Skinwalker Ranch. Before we begin tonight, I'd like to set the tone a little bit. This isn't a traditional story, in that it's not easily categorized. It doesn't fit neatly or wholly into the subgenres, if you will, of aliens or Bigfoot or Native American folklore or interdimensional theories or cryptids or even witches. But to a certain degree, and depending on your own theories of course, it might very well have elements of all those within. That aside, and as always, I will present you with the facts, then you can make up your own minds. The events surrounding what I'm going to discuss tonight start way back in the 1860s, in the area of what is now the small town of Fort Duchesne in northern Utah. At this time, much of the territory of Utah had been the land of the Ute people and culture for many centuries, dating back to around 1300. For centuries, the Ute people had lived alongside and in harmony with the Navajo people. But after the Spanish came in around 1600, the Ute began trading with them, first horses and firearms, and thus their hunting and warrior skills developed. Then later the Ute adopted the slave trade. With their newfound skills of war, the Ute were now fighting for land with the Navajo, and would also abduct the Navajo and sell them into slavery to the Spanish. By 1863, the Ute had been recruited into the infantry division of the famous frontiersman Kit Carson, and fought with them during the Civil War, following which they stuck with him when Carson was assigned the role of forcing the Navajo onto US government reservations. Following years of what the Navajo saw as betrayal, bad blood and ill will from the Ute, the Navajo placed an eternal curse on the Ute people and their lands, specifically the lands of the Uinta and Ure Indian Reservation. It's worth mentioning that there are recorded events from the Spanish settlers in this area around 1700 of strange lights and flying metal galleons in the air. So while the Navajo curse placed evil into the land, there was already a curious and unexplained aura to the area already. With the curse came even more eerie happenings, paranormal events, and malevolence that, if only a fraction of are true, would require a massive leap from the known reality to accept. Fast forward 130 years. This is where things start to get even more eerie. In 1994, Gwen and Terry Sherman purchased part of the land as a ranch and homestead from a family by the name of Myers. Most accounts of this story do not make any reference to the Myers family, but we'll come back to that later. The Shermans and their two teenage sons moved their 80 head of livestock to the site immediately. The Shermans had got a real deal on the ranch. In fact, it was a steal. They asked the realtor if there had been a murder there or something, mainly because they purchased a homestead including corral, barn and various farm equipment on top of 480 acres of land for less than $200,000, which was unheard of in the area, or any area for that matter. It really was the Shermans' dream home. Terry Sherman had dreamed of owning his own cattle ranch for a long time. This is what he had always worked towards. Terry had a degree in animal husbandry and is an authority on animal insemination. He hoped to breed and raise his own prime cattle and soak up the good life, pure isolation and peace with his family. He set himself tough goals though, hoping that, for example, his annual animal loss rate would be less than 1%, the average being around 5% for a ranch this size in this location. But if anyone could do it, Terry could. The day they took possession of the ranch, the family arrived and were keen to unpack. As they did, they spotted an enormous coyote or wolf in one of the pastures. This was really strange, Terry thought, mainly because there were no wild wolves in this area. There hadn't been wild wolves in Utah since 1929, in fact. Slowly, the animal approached them, walking toward them in an S shape. Terry noted the animal had piercing, bright blue eyes and was enormous, almost twice the size of a normal wolf. Terry estimated the animal must have been easily 4 feet to its shoulders, maybe just over 5 feet tall in total. At this juncture, I'd like to clarify that the biggest known wolves on record are the Yukon wolves, and the tallest recorded only stood at a total of 4 feet in height, so what Terry saw was a behemoth. Weirdly, the wolf didn't seem intimidating to them. It felt almost friendly, so the family members began to pet it. It had been a rainy day, and the Sherman said the creatures smelled particularly like a wet dog. After a few minutes, the wolf took notice of the cattle pen. All the animals were stirring and shrinking away from the fence in fear of the animal, all except one young calf, no doubt too young to know the fear that comes with the presence of a predator. The wolf slowly scounted over to the livestock pen and grabbed the calf's head through a gap in the fence, trying to drag it through the bars. Right away, the family jumped to action. Terry Sherman and his father beat the animal to make it release the calf. The wolf didn't flinch. It didn't even seem to take notice of them. Sherman called to one of his sons to fetch his handgun. With that, Terry shot the animal with a .357 Magnum at point-blank range to the back. Still, it kept his jaws on the calf. After another shot, it released the calf but didn't turn. It stood and watched the family for a while. Sherman shot a third time, but there was no blood or sign of injury on the animal, although it began to back off. Terry grabbed his hunting rifle and shot it again. Finally, the shot produced a bit of skin and hair from the wolf, but the animal was still calm. After a few more shots, it skulked off across a pasture into a wet, bushy area. Terry was baffled by the beast, but knew he couldn't allow a predator the size of this one to live on or near his ranch. It was too much of a risk to his cattle. Along with his two sons, Sherman tracked it for more than a mile. Even though it had a 70-foot or so head start, it was winter and there was snow down, so it was easy to track via its footprints. Terry and his sons emerged from a copse to find themselves almost at the river which ran through the east side of the ranch. The footprints had stopped dead, in the middle of a sandbank, with 50 feet either side of them to either the river or the pasture. Where the hell did it go? It was as if it vanished into thin air, or levitated into the air. Terry and his sons were baffled, but they returned to the farm. The remaining hair and flesh that had been shot off the wolf had a foul smell, like rotten meat combined with a musky fox scent. It made them feel sick. What the hell just happened? A few weeks later, while Gwen Sherman was headed into town, she encountered a wolf so large its back was parallel to the top of her car roof. As it stood beside her car, it had to duck down to peer into the driver's side window. Gwen was petrified. She remained still, frozen until the wolf walked away. The wolf was accompanied by a dog-like animal that she couldn't identify, smaller in size, with a very strange walk and gait of movement. What was this place? The Shermans were starting to get an uneasy feeling. When the family had first moved into the house on the ranch, they had thought that the previous owners were overly paranoid about intruders, given that every door and window had deadbolts and padlocks on them. What was strange, though, was that the padlocks were on both sides of the windows and doors. Further, the padlocks were also on the internal doors and cupboards also. After the first few days, the encounters with the wolves, they thought they understood why. Shortly after the family had moved in, disturbances also began. Disturbances within the house itself. The first such instance, they would later recall, was when Gwen would return home with groceries. Because they lived a good while drive from town, they tended to stock up for a month at a time, so understandably, there were a lot of groceries to unpack. It took Gwen about 40 minutes to put everything away, following which she popped into the bathroom to wash her hands. When she returned to the kitchen, she froze in horror. All the groceries were back in their bags, on the table. She felt she was going crazy. Did she unpack them? No, she definitely did. Occurrences like this gradually became more commonplace in the house. Items would vanish for weeks at a time and appear in the most random places. Furniture would move of its own accord. Eyes would appear in the darkness at the window at night. They would hear voices whispering in an unknown dialect, but couldn't find where the voices were coming from, and strange knocking and thumping noises would occur against the walls. Normally, a phenomenon like this would drive a family screaming from their home into the night. That would be the case, I'm sure, if the problems in the house didn't pale in comparison to those that happened outside the house. As well as the local sheriff's department, the area is also patrolled by the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs. About a month after the Sherman family had moved into the property, 2 individuals were spotted stood on the private road that leads to the Sherman ranch by 2 BIA officers. The officers slowly approached what they thought was 2 men in their patrol car until their headlights shone upon them. They stated that they were hit in an instant by fear and realized that the 2 men were in fact 2 wolves stood on their hind legs. At a towering height of nearly 7 foot tall, the 2 wolves stared at them for a while before turning and walking away into the darkness of the ranch, still on their hind legs. The 2 officers knew straight away what the wolves were. They were skinwalkers. By now, this story has delivered strange behaving wolves and poltergeist activity, but bear with me while we go a little deeper and a little bit stranger. As I said previously, the wolves standing upright like a human were known to the Native American BIA officers as skinwalkers. The officers knew that skinwalkers existed in this area. They had for a long time due to the Navajo curse. The local Native Americans would not venture anywhere near the Sherman Ranch. They knew only too well that it was now unholy ground with all manner of evil existing there. If only the Shermans had done their due diligence prior to their purchase. Whether they knew it or not, whether it was an intentional part of the curse, the Navajo had unleashed onto the land the skinwalkers, which were known to all Native American tribes as the worst evil of all. A skinwalker was believed in all the Native American cultures to be a supernatural and evil witch that is capable of switching between forms. From a man to most commonly a wolf, they are known to not be trusted, and their sole existence is to inflict pain, suffering, misery, and death. These dire wolves can only, the legend says, be killed with a bullet to the neck, a legend that was borrowed by European settlers in their stories of werewolves later on. The skinwalkers were believed to not live on the ranch itself, but close by, in a place that is strictly forbidden to visit at all, by anyone, a place called Dark Canyon. Dark Canyon actually contains petroglyphs. They are hundreds of years old. The petroglyphs picture skinwalkers on the land many hundreds of years ago, and also flying machines in the sky above the land. Which brings us to the next part of our story. The Shermans lived on the ranch for almost 2 years, but eventually left, unable to continue living with the bizarre and nightmarish incidents that were happening on the ranch. Frequent became strange blue lights and orbs over the ranch. Their first encounter with which occurred while both Terry and Gwen were out taking a walk one evening. A blue orb, about the size of a regular family car, emerged over the ridge and slowly approached them. They could hear it crackling, almost like static electricity. It spooked horses nearby. Terry stated that within the orb were 2 what appeared to be fluids or nuclei. It inspected them up close and also floated over to a cow and inspected its face up close. Terry said that him and Gwen were terrified and had no idea what the hell it was. The orb took off down toward the river over a small hill. He sent his 3 dogs after it. In the darkness, he heard the pained cries of the dogs yelling out in agony. Fearful, the Shermans retreated home. However, the next morning, upon investigating the area where the orb and the dogs ran to, Terry found 3 greasy, fleshy blobs of liquefied flesh on the ground. The dogs were never seen again. The orbs became a regular occurrence, as did strange and unknown creatures at the ranch. The Shermans were keen to stay away from them and lock their house down when they could. As well as the orbs, they witnessed UFOs above the ranch, both moving and hovering. At times, the vehicles would cause the ranch to light up like the floodlights from a football stadium were turned on. Terry has stated that there was one incident where he was out in his fields when he could hear whispering. There was talking in an unknown dialect. He felt that it pinpointed the area where it was coming from, but it seemed to be in the air directly above him. But he couldn't see anyone or anything. Terry called out. and he could hear the voices which seemed to be mocking him and discussing him. Eventually the Sherman's cattle began to be affected. Cows and bulls would go missing or turn up mutilated, with their anus or face clawed out. Entrails removed, but always minus any blood, and with surgical precision. The phenomenon on the ranch, be it the skinwalkers, the orbs, or the strange animals, always seemed both sentient and malevolent. With the addition of the cattle mutilations and disappearances, the Shermans were unsettled enough to sell the ranch. The family finally upped and left and sold the ranch to a man by the name of Robert Bigelow. A billionaire businessman from Las Vegas, Bigelow is the head of Bigelow Aerospace, a contractor who works with NASA developing space travel and accommodation. He made his billions through a US-based budget hotel chain called Budget Suites of America. He also lost a son and a grandchild, both at very young ages, which allegedly piqued his interest in the paranormal and also attempting to contact the dead. Bigelow purchased the Sherman Ranch with the intention of studying it, and he did just that. He hired a team of top scientists who investigated phenomena at the ranch for a period of 10 years. The outcome of which, and the final report, is now classified top secret, after the United States government announced in 2018 that it had invested $22 million into the venture as part of their secret study into extraterrestrial life between 2009 and 2011. I personally think that this legitimacy is what makes the story most chilling of all. Because like I said earlier, some tales are too fantastic to digest or accept, but when there is evidence enough to garner attention from a national government, you may have to reconsider things, ever so slightly. Some vocal individuals of opposition to the Sherman family's stories have been the Myers family, who, if you recall, the Shermans bought the land and homestead from. The son of the family has come forward to say that nothing happened on the ranch while he was there over a number of years. This, however, contravenes all of the Native American locals who have witnessed events and phenomenon for generations. This also doesn't make sense considering the wealth of locks that the Myers left attached to all the doors inside and out, including interior cupboards and windows. Further, a Las Vegas anthropologist, who is an expert in Native American law, Dan Benechek, feels that the Navajo would never have got a skinwalker to assist them in their revenge. Skinwalkers are dangerous tricksters. They would kill a skinwalker on sight if they ever came across one, as they are so dangerous. He makes no other comment regarding further phenomenon of the ranch, however. George Knapp, who is a Las Vegas-based news reporter and radio anchor, known for his stints presenting Coast to Coast AM in the absence of George Norrie, and also as the reporter who broke the Bob Lazar Area 51 story in 1989, has stated that he believes the ranch is a doorway to another dimension, and it is via this doorway that extraterrestrials come through to our world. George Knapp has authored a book based on the evidence from the Skinwalker Ranch, titled Hunt for the Skinwalker. Critics have said that this story is muddled and all over the place, that the phenomenon is too out there, and the stories are too unbelievable. Well, that may be so, but if the evidence is unbelievable, then surely the story would be. This case has come to the forefront of notoriety in recent years, and is very much the paranormal story of the moment. Originally, the Shermans remained hidden from the press and were keen to keep their identity a secret. However, they still seek no financial gain from the story. But as with any story as fantastic as this one, there is only one person who can tell you if you should believe it or not. Sleep tight, everyone, and take care of yourselves. And remember, stand firm as you enter the darkest night. Thanks for listening tonight, everyone. I appreciate this story has been a little bit out of this world, but if you'd like to help us out, give us a follow over on Twitter at twitter.com/deadsoulscast. It really helps. And also, if you so wish, please check us out on our Patreon, which is patreon.com/deadsouls, where you can pick up some cool shit and get involved with the podcast. Also, as it's coming up to the festive season, we just might drop a surprise or two over the next few weeks, so keep your eyes peeled. Good night, everyone.